I'm joined tonight by futurist and lawyer and contemplative friend of the show, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, what's your take on the climate crisis?
I think, ain't that the truth? I think all the points that you made in your speech are very, very valid. It was Edward Bernays, the father of PR, who said that the best way to sell anything is through fear. And boy, have we been living in a whole era of fear. We live in a diseased information age, don't we? And I think you say the science, put the word the in front of it, and it does, it shuts off the conversation. Your point about weather maps have become scarier and scarier, haven't they? What do you call it, a pizza? It is, effectively, a sort of pizza on that sort of basis.
The numbers haven't changed.
Yeah.
So all they can do is colour them differently.
Well, the trouble as well, though, Ian, is that, I'm sorry, Neil, is that everybody's become an expert. And so what's happened is that in a pandemic, everybody becomes a virologist, or we become scientist, or constitution, we talk about all that sort of side. And we're drowning in a sea of information, most of which is false. And what we should do is look at the facts, try and get different sources, make sure they're verified, peer verified, and come to an informed decision. And what I love about your show, we've got both sides of the equation today, haven't we?
Yeah. I am genuinely mystified about the whole net zero,
yes,
you know, zero carbon, because this is a carbon-based planet, and we and the rest of life, it's carbon-based. So what is actually meant by zero carbon?
And it's bizarre, it's marketing speak, isn't it? It's a little mission, it's incredibly expensive, and you have to work out how effective it is. People say that smoking accentuates the risk of lung cancer. Well, the question is, to what extent has humanity contributed to these changes in temperature? And you're right, you look at history, we've had extremes of temperature, and we have the Cassandra of climate change. There's an article in the Times today with the wonderful Lucy Bannerman, and she was talking about Frederica Otto, there she is, in all her wonderfulness, and she does these sort of verified sort of tests to say, look, we're 600 times more likely as a result of human contribution to see these increased temperatures. I'm not a scientist, and then I think most people who comment on these things are not really scientists. What we need to do is get the educated people who understand this space, give the facts and figures, and then let's try to make a reasoned decision based on that.
This 97% figure that's bandied about, we need, it's only legitimate to listen to the other scientists, and they are not 3%. That's a bogus figure. We need to listen to the scientists, the experts who are saying that there's a different correlation and causation and relationship between CO2 and the temperature of the planet and our contribution to all of that. And that side of the conversation has been silenced.
And you're absolutely right. And as soon as you shut down a debate, that's the time to get worried.
That's the time to get worried. We're on a break already. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by the researcher, commentator and blogger Ben Pyle to ask whether the high temperatures in the Mediterranean at the moment are the result of global warming. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Thanks for hanging on in there with Neil Oliver live. Now, among much else we're discouraged from questioning is the notion that nothing poses more of a threat to life on Earth than you, me and the rest of the human race. Our dependence on oil and gas, we're told, will soon make life unlivable for all. Speaking only for myself, I'm not convinced, not by a long chalk, and it's a subject I'm keen to hear talked about properly. Joining me first of all this evening is researcher, commentator and blogger Ben Pyle to contemplate how worried we should be about the weather reports from the Med. Good evening, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, Neil. It's good to be here and meet at last.
What do you make of these red and black and purple weather maps that were being shown about popular holiday destinations?
Well, I think you and Andrew put your finger on it a moment ago. This is marketing, changing the colours and hoping that people are going to buy this more attractive product or this more scary product, because now it's got these sort of science fiction representations of heat, these purples, these blacks, these very, very sort of alarming colours. And this has been tried many times in different forms. We've even had climate marketeers, I suppose you could call them, and people, in fact, very much associated with the 97% survey that you cited earlier. They were trying to explain or explain the heat in the atmosphere that had been accumulated, as they claim, as a result of global warming in terms of nuclear bombs. So how many nuclear bombs of energy there are in the atmosphere, and similarly, a different group of climate activists and climate marketeers have tried to explain the accumulation of heat in the oceans. Not in terms of degrees centigrade or Fahrenheit, as most people, including scientists, would have understood, but in terms of the joules or megajoules, or in astronomical numbers, numbers that would take 24 places to represent. And these are all just different ways to try and make you more scared, so that they feel more confident in having conveyed their emotions to you. But underneath it all, these colours aren't science, and in fact the figures underlying the new colours aren't particularly scientific either. Whatever the temperatures are, unfortunately, different agencies have tried to interpret them in different ways recently. So I think there's the European Space Agency unhelpfully intervened by claiming that temperatures in southern Europe, the Mediterranean, southern Europe, would be in the mid to high 40s, and then when everyone looked at the actual data, it turned out they wasn't. But these are people whose thumbs are, if they're not on the scale of the attempt to acquire this data, they're certainly pushing a bit too hard on our buttons in trying to make us interpret it.
As you say, am I right in thinking, I think it evolved very quickly this week, that the frightening figures that were being predicted, the figures in the 40s, it turned out, am I right in saying that they were satellite images of temperature of the ground surface, how hot the ground was to touch, in contrast to what is normally related to weather forecasting and weather reporting, which is the temperature of the air some feet above the ground. And that was how they were getting figures that normally start with a 3 to figures that started with a 4.
Well, that seems to be the case. It's unfortunately, because because a lot of the people involved are only very good at generating heat rather than light, no pun intended. It's actually been quite difficult for anyone to make any sense of it at all, because that clearly is the case that people have been using either novel ways of communicating these figures, or indeed using the ground temperatures, as you say, rather than the 1.5 meter weather station data, and it's all to the all adds to the confusion. So it's nobody yet really knows what the actual temperatures were, whether there can be any inference here made about global warming or climate change,
bear with me.
And what we should really do about it.
Bear with me, Ben. Andrew Eborn, how do you react to that? This idea that we're being, it feels again like we're being nudged.
Yes.
Nudged to think something that's in somebody else's interests, that's not necessarily the case.
With all these things, you have to ask why we're being told it, who's telling us, and what benefits do they have as a result of doing it. It was Abraham Lincoln who said, if you say basically a calf, if you count the tail, how many legs does a calf have? The answer is still 4, it's not 5 if you count the tail as a leg. Tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. What we need to find out, and this is why I say get the scientists together, to what extent is any of this man-made? Because if it's not, there's certainly other causes, and we look at throughout history those sort of causes, and maybe I can ask Ben exactly that question. Do you think man has contributed at all to this side?
There you go, Ben. What do you say?
Well, probably. That seems to be... There's good scientific arguments and good scientific evidence that CO2 is a greenhouse gas and that this will warm the atmosphere, and that warmer atmosphere may produce somewhat different climate. What I disagree with, what I think is important, is how that climate change or how that global warming turns into the climate crisis, as we've been warned is happening and is going to get worse. Because there's no evidence of that. There might be evidence of a slightly warmer atmosphere, and I stress it's slightly warmer, and there might be slightly different climate patterns, but we're not seeing a massive, as Neil's monologue really well demonstrated, we're not seeing a huge increase of catastrophic events of extreme weather. And in fact, what we do see is a massively reduced impact of weather of all kinds, including extreme weather, on us. So climate impacts over the last century have diminished completely. So in the heat wave, for example, in London in 1911, there were more than 1,000 deaths, mostly as a consequence, in fact, of spoiled food, which children ate, and then they sadly died of diarrhea because of the food poisoning. So climate interacts with the way we live our lives in very many different ways, and refrigeration was an innovation that dramatically changed that. So we were much better able to survive heat waves by storing food better or chilling the air for more vulnerable people. Heat waves really used to be a problem. It does sound to me, though, as though, Ben, we would be relinquishing what control we have over our own well-being by surrendering fossil fuels at this moment. But, Ben, I've run out of time. Thank you so much for your contribution so far this evening, and it's a conversation I'd like to pick up with you again in the weeks and months ahead. Another break is here. Coming up afterwards, we'll be joined by environmental campaigner Donnachadh McCarthy, who says, on the contrary, the world is on fire and we should really be incredibly concerned about climate change. All of that coming up. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Few subjects inflame emotions like climate change. Battle lines are drawn and neither side seems willing to give an inch. Joining me now to contemplate how close we are to the end of life on Earth is environmental campaigner Donnachadh McCarthy. Donnachadh, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Do you take the position that there's no more debate worth having, that it's a settled deal?
Nobody says there's no more debate worth having. What we are saying is that the vast majority of scientific bodies in the world agree with the current science. Science, as you know, I have a background in science, never says anything is 100% certain. However, the current scientists believe it's above 95% certainty that the burning of fossil fuels is contributing to the global breakdown that's now happening around the world, as we've seen in the last few weeks.
Something, as a non-scientist, that it perplexes me is the idea of net zero, as though we're working towards having no carbon dioxide. Presumably that can't be the objective, because without CO2 there's no plant life and thereby no life.
Sure, as a non-scientist, you have absolutely misunderstood that. The idea of if we eliminated carbon from the atmosphere, we would die. Yeah. There would be no life on Earth. What we are saying is that if we actually throw out 1 million years worth of carbon every year by burning fossil fuels, and we keep doing that, that 1 million years worth of carbon added to the planet will cause the planet to heat. It was actually discovered by a scientist called John Tyndall, not far from here in Southwark. In the 1850s, doing science, he found certain gases have a tendency to trap heat. So therefore, and carbon dioxide is one of those, and because we are emitting so much extra carbon into the atmosphere, it's causing this disaster that's now unfolding.
I read over and over again that CO2 lags behind a warming planet by, I keep on seeing 800 years, that the planet warms and then more CO2 is released, so that it's not the CO2 that's warming the planet, but that the planet is becoming warmer for some other reason, and that releases off gases more CO2. Is that wrong?
That's a theory, but the facts are, John Tyndall discovered that if you add carbon dioxide, it traps heat. It's a basic physical fact.
Although the planet might be warmer anyway and make it more CO2.
There are other reasons, and there always have been reasons. The planet will always get warmer and colder. There are hot periods and cold periods. However, the science is very clear. This gas traps heat. And so therefore it's almost primary school maths. If you add a gas that traps heat in massive amounts to the atmosphere, it causes consequences which you're now seeing unfolding.
Water vapour traps heat also. Yes. Also. And there's much more. We produce much more in the way of water vapour, but nobody's demonising water vapour.
There are many global warming gases. They vary from carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, water vapour, etc. All of them trap carbon to a certain extent. However, so for example, carbon dioxide is around rated 25. Methane is 100 times more powerful. Fluorocarbons are thousands of times more powerful. However, the biggest amount of additional gases causing climate change are actually carbon dioxide.
How much carbon dioxide do you want to see as a proportion of the atmosphere? I think at the moment it's around the 400 mark, which is amongst the lowest levels it's been at in the last 50 million years. Where should it be for what you would regard as optimum life survival on Earth?
The carbon dioxide currently is at a 800,000-year high. What we need to see it is actually roughly in the middle of the the 19th century, which is 3.3. In the 19th century, it was 280. The scientists regard the danger zone as 350. So I'm not proposing we take it back to the 19th century, but if we can take it back to the middle of the 20th century at 350, we might avoid the danger.
Andrew, how do you react?
Well, what I love about this debate is we're going to shine more light, less heat. It was interesting talking to Ben earlier, and I asked him the question, to what extent has humanity contributed? Because that's the question, isn't it? He did agree that there has been some sort of contribution. The question is quantum. So when you quote about 800,000 years, I would first of all say, how do we know that? Because I'm not a scientist, as we admit at the very beginning. What we need to do is work out where's the common ground.
Well, that's very easy. The science, if you want to know where the science came from, is actually scientists went to the Arctic, which were their thousands and thousands of years of ice records, and you drill down 2 miles, and you pull it up, and you look at the amount of CO2 at every metre. And that's how they're able to tell the history of CO2 on this planet.
So what do you say to people who say, look, hang about, throughout history, the planet's been warmed and so on and so forth, with Neil in his monologue at the beginning. What do you say to them?
It's true. The planet has heated and got cooled. But what we haven't done is we've actually, as humans, thrown the equivalent of 1 million years of stored carbon every year into the atmosphere. So we are very, very fast changing the chemical composition of the atmosphere. And the chemical composition of the atmosphere has always changed. But the consequences are terrifying. They happen over millions of years. Yes. What we are doing is over decades.
So your common ground is that humanity has contributed. Is the disagreement as to the quantum of that contribution?
The disagreement is actually whether or not we take action.
Okay.
And I would argue that's the problem. There is, you talked about in your intro about the debate being shut down. I experience it quite differently. I look at the British media and I see the Telegraph, the Mail, the Sun, the Express, GB News and Talk TV, almost all fighting climate action. And I feel very, very despairing because actually I think the future of this country is at stake. I look at the science, and the science predicted that if you add carbon, it gets hotter, and if it gets hotter, we get consequences such as...
Does it though? I mean, 150 million years ago, you know, the temperature fell dramatically on the planet at the same time that levels of CO2 spiked dramatically. You know, and so, and during the Eocene thermal maximum, right, when the temperature was higher than at any time in the last 500 million years, the CO2 had been on a downward track at that point for 150 million years. So the planet getting warmer and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere doesn't correlate in the way that you're saying that it necessarily does.
There are many, many impacts on the temperature and on climate. What is irrefutable is basic physics, is that if you actually measure the amount of heat coming through a gas, the carbon dioxide traps it. Now, then the argument is, should we actually stop burning fossil fuels? In my view, should we take that gamble with future generations? The science will say there's a 1% chance. It will always say there's a 1% chance, 5% chance that the settled science is wrong. Always does that. But would you get on a plane that has a 95% chance of crashing?
Oh, it's an interesting point. And what I love about this is that you talk about not having the discussion is taking place. A lot of the people go too far. People like Just Stop Oil actually alienate a lot of people as a result of the actions they take. Whereas if we have a sensible discussion about it and say, look, these are the steps you need to take to make that make sense, what steps should we take and what difference will it actually make?
Well, what Just Stop Oil has a very simple demand. which says stop investing in new fossil fuels to add to the problem and invest instead in energy efficiency, in renewables and storage. I mean, I think you're a futurist.
Yes, absolutely.
I predicted 25 years ago, when I installed the first solar panels in London into my house, that in 20, 30 years, the role of an energy company would be to manage energy, not produce it. So I've got to a stage where my bills for my house are minus £100 a year.
Very good.
I don't have a gas bill. My water bill is £100 and my electricity bill is minus £250. So for most of the year, I've imported nothing, morning, noon and night, because I've got batteries and solar panels. Is that not something we would want for, working class people?
Absolutely. Very good from an economic point of view. And you should have, basically, you should make sure you insulate, because that will work on that sort of basis as well.
Before I'll lose you because of time, what about the argument that, James Lovelock, he of the Gaia argument, he has recanted to some extent and now speculates, or at least allows for the possibility, that we might be the saviours of the planet by releasing more CO2. That what we should be doing is actually increasing actively the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere because of the greening that it would enable Gaia, or the planet, to perform.
I don't know.
That would be a more robust, more fertile planet would be good for all of us.
I don't know where you got that from, James Lovelock. James Lovelock, bless him, has died. He's departed. But the quote, I actually read a quote today from James Lovelock, and it was actually the other extreme that he was saying, that in his view that we are potentially past the safe zone, that we are inversible. And so therefore we are on that balance whether or not we have a chance of surviving. Now, if I'm correct that 95% of science saying that I am correct is true, surely the patriotic thing to do is to take action and actually invest in a renewable, low-energy economy that actually people can have warm homes and low bills, and we save the planet.
Have to leave that conversation there simply because we've run out of time, but thank you for that, Donnachadh McCarthy. We're on another break, unfortunately, after which it's fossil hunters and a 450,000-year-old mammoth tusk in Cambridgeshire. Stay with us. There you are. Thanks for staying with me. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Fossil hunters made a mammoth discovery in Cambridgeshire last week, unearthing an enormous 450,000-year-old tusk. It was in a gravel quarry, whence many of these discoveries come, as it turns out. And a pair of history lovers came across the remains of an ancient giant just under the surface of the sand, a well-preserved relic 4 feet in length that may have belonged to a steppe mammoth during the Ice Age or some part thereof. I'm joined now by Jamie Jordon and Sarah Moore, the founders and curators of Fossils Galore. Hello, both. I love a story like this. Where's the rest of the mammoth?
I know, yeah. It's turning up in bits. We keep coming across odd bones here and there, so foot bones, rib bones, vertebra.
So it's not a shed tusk, as it were. It's there because the mammoth came to the end of its natural life at that place and time.
Yes, I'd definitely say so. We've had bits of skull material, so it seems it's one mammoth there at the moment, and yeah, it come to its demise in that area.
What was Britain like when this giant elephant relative walked the earth?
So it was quite warm, and it was just starting to go into the cold periods just before it started the Ice Age, and then it suddenly got very, very cold, and then pretty much soon after, it's quite a short Ice Age for this one. The ice sheets started to melt, and we had surges of Ice Age gravels and that of rocks which were ripped up during the glaciers ripping across the country, being deposited very, very rapidly.
Tell me, oh, what an image that is, but tell me how it feels to you to be in the presence, the physical presence of something that is, 450,000 years old.
It's brilliant. So they're quite a marvel to see. I mean, when you look at pictures, as you can see, we use our dog as a size image, but it's actually quite big, and the customers we've had come in and actually see it in our preparation laboratory, they've all said the same thing. It's a lot bigger in person than they thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Andrew Eborn is with me in the studio. Andrew, how do you react?
I have to ask, is that Crystal? That's your special beagle?
That is, yes, that's Crystal. The fossil
Because Crystal normally goes on the hunt with you to find these fossils. What I love about it is what it reveals about life at that particular time, because as I understand it, bears and lions and also hippos used to wander around our part of sort of Cambridgeshire at that time. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Yeah, it was a very interesting environment at the time, with big animals roaming about. So completely different to what you see today.
Yeah, I also understand that the tusks of the mammoth, rather like a tree, you can tell about the environment. And if the particular rings are very tightly done, they've got a bad habitat. But if they're nice and thick, the rings, then they were living very well. So I'm an expert on these things.
Very well done.
Yeah. That's it. And you can also, something that I'm very interested in as well, you can actually see how the mammoth lived through marks on the outside of the tusk, so whether it was preyed upon or not.
Was it living well? You know, was this a healthy, happy mammoth?
So far from what we can see, it's really hard to see at the moment, but we've seen that there's quite thick rings in between the middle of its life as such, but it's something that we're looking to research a bit more as we go in after the preservation has finished.
Is it valuable? I mean, you know, obviously it's ivory. Is it hypothetically is it valuable? In fact, I'm going to have to cut you there. I'm going to have to wait for that answer because I'm running out of time. Thank you both. Thank you for being with me this evening. We'll be back at the same time next week. And up next is the wonderful and incomparable Father Calvin Robinson and his Common Sense Crusade.